Today we're going to talk about how to learn software development as quickly as possible. This is how I got a job in 3 months and how I became a senior developer in less than a year. Finding the correct course is going to be the most important thing that you're going to do. And if you mess up, it's okay, but it's a little more complicated than it sounds. So finding the correct course is sometimes a challenge because a lot of the courses out there actually introduce concepts and new terminology without fully explaining what those things are or assuming that you already know them. And that's what I saw in my experience. Maybe you find the right course right off the bat and you won't experience that. But if you see that concepts are being introduced without properly being explained, I would look for another course. Because as you're going along, there's going to be this assumed knowledge. And if you never understood it in the first place, you're going to have problems. So you want to make sure that when you're going along the course, there's no assumed knowledge. Because the proper course should teach you every step of the way, and whatever is being discussed should have already been covered previously, or is being covered at that exact time so you can gain that understanding. Because in software development, the concepts build on top of each other, right? So anytime there's missing information, you're not going to get that later information, because you're not going to understand it. And the key basics are your foundation to your success as a software developer. Another thing that you want to make sure you're getting out of the course is that you're actually understanding. A lot of times it's very easy to get into a course and you're just copying and pasting and you're following along doing exactly what they're doing in the course, and you're like, hey, this is very easy. But as soon as you're done with the course, you're like, what did I learn? you probably didn't really get it, right? So just pay attention to your own state of mind during this. Like, are you actually really understanding it? Can you think with the information being provided? So you need to be able to get those concepts and be able to communicate them yourself, because it's going to be assumed that you know those things. The indicator of a correct course will be that when you learn something, you will have some understanding of how to apply it yourself without your hand being held throughout the whole process. So that's something you want to make sure you do, because if you're going along a course and you feel like you're not really understanding, just drop it. Find something else. There's so many courses out there. Just find one that is actually properly teaching you, because that's going to be a major part of your success. Okay, so let's say you did find some course that you feel like is pretty good, but you run into something along the way. So the key thing is, if some new concept is introduced but is not explained, just take a moment, do your own research on that, get some level of understanding, so you can actually still continue on with the course. So I don't think there's going to be any perfect course, just 100% perfect. And you will have to do a little bit of your own research. So just fill in the gaps of knowledge with your own research, and I think you will find a package that will work well for you. Make sure you guys stick to the end, where I'm going to demonstrate to you guys exactly how I find the answer to any question I have related to software development, and I think is the real secret to success as a software developer. The next thing we're going to talk about is tutorials. A lot of these courses have some sort of coding project in them. So they're great to do when you first start, but just don't get stuck in them. Because what ends up happening is, great, you can follow along, you can do exactly what he's doing, but it's not very far from just copy and pasting, right? So do the tutorial, get that base level understanding, and really try to force yourself to actually do it without watching, right? Let's say there's some concept in the video. It's like, let's say making a website. It's like, let's put the button on this part of the screen. Really try to figure it out yourself. Use Google, do whatever you need to do to try and figure it out. Then watch the tutorial and see what he did, and compare it with what you did, and try it his way and be like, okay, maybe that was better, maybe worse, and you can be the judge of that. And then anytime you run across an issue, just take the time to do the research yourself. And if you do that and you use the tutorials that way instead of just following along blindly, then you will actually really get something out of it. Because if you just follow and copy, there's only so much you will get. And maybe you will learn that exact specific thing that he's teaching you to do, but you won't gain the understanding and the knowledge and these other skills like research that you're really going to need as a software developer. The next important thing to do is to just go out and build something, right? Not following along some tutorial every step of the way, but just come up with some idea of what you want to build. You can even use ChatGPT to generate some ideas for you. That's okay. But come up with some idea and just figure it out every step of the way. When you're first starting out, it might be very difficult. You might be searching for the simplest things, like just how to set up the project. What is the structure of the files? But that's okay. That's part of the process. And not only will you actually be learning the things that you need to be learning, but it's going to teach you how to do research as a developer, because that's something that's never going to go away. You constantly will be looking for solutions to problems that you're running into, and that will develop that skill. And you will develop it by just having to build something without that guided step-by-step process. It's going to force you to actually learn every single thing that you need to learn to actually build something. And that applies to any development language, any kind of software you're trying to build, a website, could be anything. So it's important to just have a little bit of courage and just have the attitude of like, hey, I can figure this out, and go through the process of figuring that out, right? And it will be challenging. You might lose some hair in the process, but at the end of it, you will actually feel pretty confident that, hey, I built this thing by myself, whatever that may be. I think the first thing that I built was a command line interface calculator, and it was very simple, but by the end of it, I was like, hey, I actually built this. I felt proud of it. The real secret to being a really good software developer. So the key is actually in how you find answers to your questions. So we're going to do a little demo, and I'll show you guys what I mean and walk you through the process of how I find answers every step of the way, regardless of how little I know about the subject. Okay, so the example that we have is that you're building a website and you're trying to figure out how to do something like this, right? Where things are laid out next to each other in a very clean way. And also something like this where it's kind of laid out in a grid, right? So let's start with our first search. How do I align things in a row on a website? So we can just start going in. And this is assuming you don't know anything about this, right? This is just a simple concept that I've picked, but this can apply to any complex thing. So let's see what we get. Here I see this mention of this flex box and a link to this. We can take a look at that. Again, I see this flex. Again, flex. We can run this code snippet. It's not exactly what I was asking for, but close. Okay. And they're all mentioning flex. So when there's also unanimous agreement like that, that's a good indicator. So let's see what those links actually lead us to. So now you can start reading about this and see if it's what you're actually looking for. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the text here, but even just by looking at the pictures, I can kind of see that this kind of fits the description of what I was looking for, right? There's boxes being laid across in a row, and it seems like you can manipulate them in different ways. So now maybe I want to determine if this is like the right way of doing things or not. I can start searching for that. So maybe now I search, is CSS Flex the correct thing to use in 2023? I'm just going to click this one. Let's see what we find. And now if you don't know about this, there's also another thing that we found out about, which is CSS Grid, which you can then search and find out about as well. So we can search for that separately while we'll continue on. So anyway, so here's an article just kind of comparing these two and explaining what each of them are, right? So you can continue on your research and make a decision based on what you find. But you can go through and keep looking for answers until you find the answer to the question. And again, this is just a concept, and any course you're doing is probably going to explain this specifically, but you can use the same concept for any problem that you run into. Okay, so I'm just going to click into another one and let's see what we find. So I see Mozilla, they have great documentation, so I'm going to see what they say. So reading just even this first section, I can kind of see that this link will kind of answer my question. And it's talking about the use cases for this functionality, right? So reading this article, I would be able to see if it's a good fit for what I'm trying to do. So now, if we do assume it is a good fit, I might now search how to use this thing, right? So how do I use CSS Flex? Okay, so we actually came back to the same website that we saw earlier, and it was the first result in Google. So that's a good indicator, right? So now you could actually read through this and see their examples and try it out for yourself and come to an understanding of how this flex property works. And you got the answer to the first question that you were looking for. So even if you go through this article, you try to use these different properties and use flex differently, and you get it to work, and then the next day you forgot about it, you know this thing exists, right? You know flex exists. So anytime you need it, you can just open this article again or just search CSS flex. Even if you just search that, you're going to find what you need, right? And that's the main thing that you want to get out of this, is that you start with whatever simple terminology that you do have, right? So we started with how do you align items in a row, right? But then that led us to this word, flex, and we also learned about grid. And with those, we can get the actual information that we're looking for, which is exactly what we're looking for and not maybe what we're looking for, right? So by finding the right terminology, you can actually find the answer to any question you may have. And this concept expands to much more complicated things. I've ran into things myself where I'm trying to figure out how to do something, and I'm searching, and I can't find the answer. So I keep revising my search and keep searching until I find some sort of keyword that I can act on. And in this case, that was flex, right? But in another case, it might be something completely different. If you're trying to figure out how to store user information, that might lead you down a different path. And if you know nothing about that, it's going to be hard to find the exact answers you're looking for, right? So we can demonstrate that as well, just to give you an idea. So we're going to look for, how do you store user information on a website? And of course, you could use ChatGPT or other tools, whatever works best for you, but the same concepts would apply. So if I click into the first one that I find, I see mentions of MySQL database, right? So there's that. And then I see folders. I know what folders are, so I'm not going to look into that. If I continue reading down this page, I see database mentioned a few times, and I see MySQL mentioned again. So I've now found the actual thing that I'm looking for, which is some sort of database. And if you know what that is, great. If you don't know what that is, you can start searching into what a database is and how they work, right? And I've also found a specific database system. So this can lead you down into other searches now. So maybe the next search might be, how do I set up a MySQL database? You can then go into that, right? You can find a YouTube video that maybe has the whole thing as a tutorial in the programming language that you're using with all the tools you're using, or you can find an article, right? But the key is you start with what you know and then find those key terms that are going to lead you to more specific answers to your questions. And I think if there's any takeaway, that is the main takeaway. With the right terms, you can find the right answers. The more specific you get with the terminology, the more technical and detailed answers you can find. It really is not easy in the beginning, and a large part of that is because of the source of information. You know, a proper course should take you from no level of understanding to a full level of understanding for anyone, regardless of who you are and your prior experience and your prior education. But we're not in that kind of a landscape with software development, at least in my experiences. There might be courses out there that are like that, and you might find them. If you do, please let me know. But don't get discouraged, you know, and you will have struggles along the way. But it's not a you problem, it's a resource and information problem. So if you start feeling that way, just look for another source of information, and maybe many sources, and combine the different pieces of knowledge that you have along the way. And just know that you don't have to know everything, right? I've been doing this for years, and there's still a lot of things I don't know, and I have to look them up, even sometimes the simplest things. But it doesn't mean that you're not good at it or you can't learn it. It's just part of the process. As long as you know how to do research and you can learn things, and you can solve problems, you like solving problems, you can figure it out along the way. So just wanted to tell you that so you keep some encouragement along the way, and I know you can make it.